Welcome into No Punt Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. We are now about a month away from the NFL draft, and we are starting our Stars of Tomorrow preview, 2023 rookie quarterback class preview to start. As always, we start with a quarterback position, and we have a powerhouse guest with us. First-timer Crissy Froyd is joining. She is the self-proclaimed, which I absolutely love what she was telling us backstage, leader in the AAC for covering that, but she's also massive on the SEC side. She knows way more than any of us do, and we're super excited to have her on to break down this, I would say, of the recent years, a pretty solid quarterback class that could definitely swing the tide for a lot of these teams at the top of the draft. We've already seen the Panthers trade up. Could we see another team? Let's dive into it. Welcome into No Punt Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. I am your host, Joe Zolo. Top left, Josh. Bottom right, Ryan. Me, top right. Most importantly, bottom left, Crissy Froyd. How are you, Crissy?
Good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I think I said this last year that I would love to have you as a guest. And
you mentioned this actually like 2 years in a row, and I said, "Don't worry, I will make this happen."
Yeah, I think it goes back to the first Women of Fantasy episode. I think it goes back to the first Women of Fantasy. I think she was the very first name you brought up.
Crissy, I think I started.
So, are we saying that I have ghosted you for 2 years?
No.
We were too scared to ask you.
Oh wow! I'm so flattered.
So I think I started following you during COVID because I wanted to learn more about the rookie quarterback class. Or I saw you a lot in general through COVID, just working in sports journalism and everything like that. And I just love the stuff you put out, and it was awesome. So very happy to have you on. And very immediately, I don't know if you have the chat pulled up on the side of you, but there's a recurring joke apparently on this show that my younger brother will just talk about Jeff Wilson whenever he has the chance. Not sure if you're a Jeff Wilson fan by any means, but Jeff Wilson's a quarterback 3 in Miami. There's no one disputing it, so there's that. But
Teddy Bridgewater is a free agent, so someone's got to be in there.
Exactly. All right. How this is going to work, folks. Crissy from Sports Illustrated is going to break down her top 5 quarterbacks entering the draft this year. Talk about some mid-round, late-round sleepers potentially. There are some teams that you could see slide in there, potentially the Raiders, the Ravens, because God knows what's happening with the Lamar Jackson situation at this point. And then break down basically the top 5 prospects: CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker. Where will they go? Will they have a shot in year 1 for fantasy football, or is it more of a long-term play in Dynasty? But we will start. Crissy, if you want to go 5-1, if you want to go 1-5, doesn't matter to me. Who would you say are your top 5 quarterbacks entering the draft in order?
All right, so I'm going to try to do a mixture of my own personal opinion and how I think things will shake out, because I feel like my own personal opinion of like ceiling-wise, who's going to work out, who's not going to, like always looks way different than the general, but I typically end up being right most of the time. So I would say
I love it.
Number 1 is Bryce Young, and then I had CJ Stroud out of Ohio State and the number 1 spot for a long time ahead of the season and during the season. But like I said earlier, this is going to sound like a weird analogy, but I feel like whenever you're in a grocery store and you're looking for dinner and you don't want to spend a lot of time on it, you want something to pop in the oven, it'll be ready in 15 minutes. Okay, so what I'm getting at here is I think that Bryce Young is a quarterback with a pretty high ceiling, but he's already experienced. He's faced higher level competition. He has proven he is one of the most mechanically polished quarterbacks I've seen over recent history. There are some things I don't like about him. His frame's unimpressive, things of that nature. But I think when it comes to a plug-and-play quarterback who can get things done and exceed expectations, Bryce Young is that. CJ Stroud, very high ceiling. He's my number 2 quarterback, but I think that he's not quite as polished up as Bryce Young, but I do think that he has a better ceiling overall. And then as far as number 3 goes, a lot of people have Will Levis here. I do not. I have Hendon Hooker, who I think could end up being the best quarterback of this draft, just hands down. across the board. But Hendon Hooker, the biggest knocks on him is that he played in a vanilla offense. And as someone who comes from the air raid, I can tell you that is the stupidest fallacy that I hear every single year. Mike Leach is my mentor. Our offense is simple, but for one, it is not one read offense. I keep a piece of paper in my purse that has all 5 progressions on them for people that want to see it. So if you would take 30 seconds to look up the offense that you're speaking on, you would know it's not a one read offense. And then by, I'd say, year 3 or so, the quarterback becomes a coach on the field that is bearing much more responsibility than the majority of offenses around there. All that to say, Josh Heupel, the head coach at Tennessee, was Mike Leach's quarterback at Oklahoma. So he uses a lot of similar concepts, and that is where that narrative is coming from. It has been dispelled for a long time. Hello, Patrick Mahomes is an air raid quarterback. He's the best quarterback in the NFL. Let's just leave it there. I don't need to talk about that anymore. But Hendon Hooker, the biggest thing, the one thing that does validate his stock falling is his injury. So I think that as far as that goes, there's something to be said about whether or not he'll bounce back from that. Other than that, I mean, he did a very good job at Virginia Tech, I thought, as a runner. Was not good enough as a passer, then comes over to an offense that is more pass heavy and then does a really good job within it. So I think this is a quarterback who has kind of been polished all around in those aspects, and I think could do really well. And then behind him, I would probably take a chance on Levis, and then I probably slide Tanner McKee or Jake Hainer in there just for my own personal things. So as far as how they're going to get drafted, it's probably going to be Bryce Young, and then I would say after that probably CJ Stroud, and then I'd say Hendon Hooker or Anthony Richardson, and then Will Levis, and then whoever of those 2 that I mentioned is going to be at 5.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up Anthony Richardson because you didn't put him in your top 5. Now, I think it's pretty obvious he's not the best passer to ever exist on planet Earth, but are you not overreacting to his freakish athletic combine? Obviously, covering the SEC, you know a lot about Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, here, hold on. My laptop is trying to die right now, so I'm going to just 1 second. I'm going to go get my charger really quick.
You're good.
It just came on.
Oh, you're good. We can bullshit talk while you're doing that.
Okay.
You're all good. So the most interesting thing that she brought up to start, Hendon Hooker could be the best quarterback in this class.
I love that, honestly.
I'm saying, I've been hearing a lot of good things about Hooker lately, and most of that's just me finally starting to look. I'm still, and I'm glad you brought it up, the Anthony Richardson thing. I was like, whoa. I feel like
that hype train's starting to pick up steam, and it's scary with the talk that, people are like, oh, he could be the number 1 pick. And
I was just going to say that.
What are
let's
we
pump
doing?
the brakes a little bit on that one.
I was just going to say that
because
the combine and the trade happened at roughly the same time, and people are like, they're trading up for Anthony Richardson, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't feel right at all when you've had these 2 quarterbacks who have just been it for their entire time, and people who know what they're talking about, Crissy, who's back with us, are not even putting Richardson in their top 5. But I feel like, and this was something I'm going to ask you about a little bit later, Crissy, I don't know how much, I feel like fantasy football Twitter specifically gets so far ahead of themselves with these quarterbacks. And we witnessed it last year where we saw people mocking trades into the top 5 for Malik Willis. And it's like, there comes a point, and I'm not going to be gentle about this, when fantasy football people need to stay in their fucking lane and realize we don't know what we're talking about, and let people like Crissy really guide the conversation. Because we have this love affair with Anthony Richardson, and he could end up being this great fantasy asset, but he might not be it when it comes to being an NFL quarterback.
Yeah, I've said this before. I think that Anthony Richardson left Florida and left college football in general way too early. This is a quarterback that needed another year. And I was pretty unimpressed with Anthony Richardson just across the board. I think that he has some good physical tools he can run, but there's about 50 other quarterbacks that can do that as well. And there's about 50 others that can't throw the ball very well, just like Anthony Richardson can't throw the ball very well. One thing I will say is that Anthony Richardson was a victim of a lot of unideal circumstances at Florida. So a lot of the things that happened are not his fault. However, the one thing that is just baffling to me is the fact that this quarterback wanted to go in this draft as opposed to go get experience anywhere else, whether that's Florida, whether that's transferring somewhere else. I just thought this quarterback was experience-wise and floor-wise, by no means ready. But I mean, in today's era too, as far as money and stock goes, I mean, he might have viewed this as the right time to go. I mean, the next class is shaping up to be good, and I think that he's got enough buzz surrounding him right now. Who's to say that that wouldn't be the case next year? So I think that if he can continue to develop as a passer and absolutely needs to sit the first year, no question about that, then maybe he does end up being a top 5 quarterback. But right now I have not seen that. There's no proof of that to me. I don't operate off of hypotheticals.
So based on that, Crissy, I got to ask, what team do you think realistically he would fit best with, where you could see, hey, we don't need to play him this year. Let's give him a year. Let him learn the offense, work with this offensive coordinator, this quarterback coach. And then in year 2, in 2024, we're talking about a guy that potentially has top 12 upside.
Yeah, I'd say Minnesota kind of sounds appealing. And from that aspect, I think that's one of them. I'd say any team that's quarterback needy, really looking to draft in around the middle of the first round, late in the first round, would be ideal for that. But like I said before, this is going to be ideally, and what probably should have happened with Malik Willis, a team that has a quarterback who's at least average as a starter right now, that maybe has 2 or 3 years left in the tank, and then you plug that quarterback in. That's the situation I'd like to see Anthony Richardson in.
So it's interesting. I think you talk about a guy that, frankly, at this point can't throw almost. So Baltimore sits at 22, and you talk about probably the most electric running quarterback in the NFL, or you could argue history, in Lamar Jackson. That's an interesting fit there, just because they are more run first oriented in that offense. Now, he may have the chance to start in year 1 if Baltimore doesn't figure their shit out with Lamar Jackson, but all the hype, he's getting very hyped up, and I'm just looking towards the top half of the draft. Even if the Jets go and get Aaron Rodgers or whatever, because at this point it's not looking likely they get him before the draft. So what about the Jets take Anthony Richardson? Because Aaron Rodgers is probably done after 2 years. I would say so. I think that with Aaron Rodgers there, I think that that's something that certainly helps. Otherwise, if Aaron Rodgers is not there, I'd say no, that's going to end up being a disaster. Who does he learn from in that aspect? Who's actually worth learning from? But then whenever we look at Baltimore, I think that if Baltimore does not figure things out with Lamar Jackson, like you said, this is an absolute match made in heaven, because I always say these quarterbacks that are far better runners than they are passers, unless they develop as a passer and they sit, it's never, ever going to work unless you switch their position and then they play another position, they do well there. But Baltimore is my one exception to that statement. They made it work. And so if they have another quarterback to plug in and they choose to draft quarterback right there and things don't work out with Lamar Jackson, they're the only team I have confidence in to take a quarterback who has next to no passing ability and to make it work. And Lamar Jackson did grow as a passer in his time in Baltimore to at least an average level, although in the postseason it seemed to get wonky and just was not good enough. But outside of that, I think that landing in Baltimore would be a good thing. And then I think that if Baltimore went a little later on, like something of a Malik Cunningham-esque, whether it's probably not going to be him, but something of that nature, Baltimore can make it work. And they've proven that. And I think that display what they're going to be looking for, honestly. Go ahead, Ryan.
Let me throw a scenario at you that I literally just made the connection while we were talking here. You have a guy who just absolutely dominated the combine. There's a team who likes to draft players who dominate the combine. You have a coach who took a chance on a Florida quarterback who couldn't throw the football.
There's no
Anthony
way.
Richardson to the Raiders. All day. The dots are connected.
I've seen that mock there, and I don't hate it, and I don't think that it could not work out. I'll say that much. I think it's a little bit of one of those wild card things that look 75-25 that actually happening, but we've seen stranger things. I mean, I said that Brock Purdy was going to get drafted, and nobody else did, and it was by the skin of our teeth, but I was right about that. So.
There you go.
He did pretty well for himself too.
He did.
Put it lightly.
He did. I was very happy to be a Brock Purdy backer.
Yeah. I mean, if lightning strikes twice, Josh McDaniels is still going to fumble the bag there, so it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
That was not my original answer, but like the more we started talking, I was like, oh shit.
Okay. Josh McDaniels will just fuck it up regardless. But okay.
Yep.
How about the two senior starting national championship quarterbacks who are nowhere near the top of the list for, I think, probably everybody. Max Duggan, Stetson Bennett. Where do you realistically see these guys, not a team per se, but realistically getting drafted day 2, day 3? What round, where do you kind of see them going?
So I'd say for Stetson, mid to late round seems most realistic. And then for Max Duggan, I'd say late round or priority undrafted free agent seems to be most realistic. Max Duggan and what his team was able to accomplish is impressive. Max Duggan himself, not very impressive. I didn't like much of anything that I saw out of him at the Senior Bowl, to be honest with you. Did not go through his progressions very well, throws flat-footed. There's a lot of red flags in quarterback evaluation, even in its most elementary form. That's Max Duggan raises whenever you watch him, and I wish I had better things to say about him, but there's just very average overall player with, like I said, going flat-footed, not going through the progressions properly, things that make you raise your eyebrows, and it's not good. And Stetson Bennett, I have obviously great story. Quarterback comes on as a walk-on, earns a scholarship, and then overtakes JT Daniels, who is now at Rice, right down the road from the house that I grew up in. I never thought he'd be attending Rice University. But then he overtakes a quarterback who is projected to potentially win the Heisman. And I think that he didn't get the proper reps that he needed ahead of the season before last, I mean. But then he got more. And the one thing that Kirby Smart said is essentially, in a nutshell, hey, we like everything about Stetson Bennett, but the one thing is this boneheaded decision-making. He called it that, and that's exactly what it was. Stetson Bennett would play so perfectly, and then he would make this horrible mistake at the worst possible time, and he did it over and over and over again. But you know what he did this season? He stopped. He didn't do that very often anymore. And so I think in this era that we're in with everyone wants a quarterback to be 6'5", 225, about 22 years old. Stetson Bennett doesn't have any of that, but I think he's a very high floor quarterback who projects at least as a Jimmy Garoppolo type of quarterback, but I think his ceiling's higher than that. I think that this is going to be a quarterback that we respect more as just a whole looking back on this in the future.
I think it's funny you bring up that he didn't make any boneheaded decisions this year, yet he just waited till after the season to make them.
Yes. Let's be honest, though. I feel like there's so many people that have a college story about doing something like that. I feel like it's just like wrong place, wrong time. Like, yes, he should be more responsible. He's a public figure on the national stage. But at the same time, I mean, I look at that and I'm like, I went to LSU. I'm sure there's several people I was surrounded by that did stuff like that all the time, but it never made it in the news.
Oh, we all do. We all do. Anyway, I want to shift back a little bit because you were talking about Hooker and him being your quarterback 3. There's always a big topic about players when they're coming into the NFL drafts older than typical. You get your 21, 22-year-olds. Hooker's 25. How does the age there play into evaluating him as a prospect and realistically what a team can get from him over the next, 3 to 5, potentially even 10 years?
Yeah, some people care about that. I don't. I think it's really dumb, to be honest with you. And I think, if anything, the majority of the time, it does not always work out this way. The majority of the time when you have an older quarterback, you're getting someone who is mature, someone who is more experienced, and someone who knows more about the game of football in several different facets. And a lot of them have typically been to different places or have been through a lot of different coaches and are more well-rounded than these younger guys. The issue with that comes is how many years am I going to get out of that quarterback, which to me doesn't really matter because there's always another draft in the coming years. Like, obviously sometimes the quarterback class is better than others, but I think that on average teams get about 10-ish years out of their quarterbacks before they switch. And if you see how many times teams draft their quarterbacks over and over again, it's clear that A, experiments don't always work out, and then B, that you might end up drafting a quarterback much sooner than the end of this person's career anyway. So the whole age thing's always been stupid. I mean, Jake Hainer thinks it's dumb. Stetson Bennett thinks it's dumb. I've talked to them about that, and I just think it's one of those things, like completion percentage, just like surface level thing that people don't really look into and just want to hype about.
How much do you think the ACL tear will hurt his draft stock and preparation going into his rookie season?
I think it could potentially make a quarterback that should be a day 1 prospect fall into day 2. I think that's a very real scenario here. But the thing about that is, and I will give some credit to that, is you don't know how well a player's going to bounce back from that. And there's no way to tell. I mean, over history, you look and there's some players that have had an injury like this or with the same severity as this, and they bounce back and they're exactly how they were before. And there's sometimes that this happens and a player comes back and is never even close to what they were before. So I can see it being a bit of a red flag thing that could cause his draft stock to fall, even though it's really obviously no fault of his own.
You talked about him being somebody that, grew a lot going over to Josh Heupel's offense in Tennessee over the last couple of years. When I sit down and I watch him play, and I've watched way more Tennessee games this year than I probably have ever because I work with Jalen Hyatt's mom. So she's always got the games on at work. And so I'm like, all right, well, we'll watch. Sure, whatever. I see a lot of Jalen Hurts in his game. How crazy am I for thinking that? Like, what kind of play style do you see him sort of fitting into the NFL, and what kind of system he would fit best in?
I think you do well in an RPO-based type offense. I also think you do well in an offense that has a lot of air raid concepts in it, because these are things that he's done before. But as far as Jalen Hurts goes, I think this is a quarterback who honestly is going to be better than Jalen Hurts, has a better ceiling as a passer than Jalen Hurts does. Because that's kind of, I can see the shades of it. But like I said, this is a quarterback that's kind of been on both sides of the coin as far as how offenses are run, how things are done. And is the key thing here, though, is the amount of adaptability he's shown, the amount of adaptability and ability to adapt and grow in a new environment. So that makes me excited about and just optimistic about his NFL transition as well.
There you go, Josh. The Eagles will draft Hendon Hooker, and he'll replace Jalen Hurts.
Well, no, honestly, like what I was thinking
right now.
Easy, don't even have to pay him.
Yeah, right. Well, Crissy, you brought this up about how, the ACL tear could potentially push him down into the second round. And honestly, like one of my first thoughts was Shane Steichen now being the head coach in Indy. Maybe instead of taking a quarterback there at 4 overall, they sit back where they're at. Maybe Hooker falls to that, top of the second round, or they trade back into the first and maybe grab Hooker as somebody that could, sit behind Gardner Minshew, who we've seen be a starting quarterback in the NFL, and kind of usher in this Colts offense now with Hendon Hooker at the helm.
Yeah, I think that's something that could absolutely work. You bring up Gardner Minshew. I think Gardner Minshew is a quarterback who's still underrated at this point, that I think has gotten some opportunities, but not enough of an opportunity, if that makes sense. I think that you guys could probably agree with that statement.
Ryan Weiss is now your biggest fan. He's the biggest Minshew fan in the world.
Giant Gardner Minshew fans here. Absolutely huge Gardner Minshew fans. All right. So actually, just because on Gardner Minshew, he played under Mike Leach. You obviously knew Mike Leach. What did he have to say about Gardner? Because obviously you say you think Gardner Minshew's underrated. Did you at all have any conversations with Mike Leach about Gardner Minshew, kind of what he liked about him? Just because right now he's currently Indy's starter.
Yeah, release time, mental processing were some big things, and just confidence and personality. I mean, Gardner Minshew kind of comes across as like, unless you're like super introvert or something, someone that anyone could get along with, and I feel like he's gotten along and made good impressions and a lot of friends with all the teams that he's been with. And I think that in some of his biggest moments, he's really shown, but he just hasn't really stuck anywhere. I'd like to see him stick somewhere consistently. But yeah, no, Mike had a lot of good things to say about him. And then the other thing too is like, the one quarterback that I constantly lament his situation is Anthony Gordon. And I mean, there's a lot of people that like Gardner Minshew, but Mike Leach also told me that there were times that he almost started Anthony Gordon over Gardner Minshew in the middle of camp. So I feel like Gardner Minshew's not gotten enough of an opportunity, but I feel like Anthony Gordon is just a quarterback. I look back at some of these quarterbacks that I feel like could have been so good that never got a chance and may never get a chance. It's just kind of a tragedy, honestly, in my opinion, with the COVID era on Anthony Gordon.
Okay. All right. Before we get into the top 5 where we think they're going to land, day 3, if there was one guy you had to pick that you believe goes day 3, or even undrafted too, because we talk about Max Duggan could be day 3 or, high priority undrafted free agent. If there's one guy you think, like you said last year, you believe Brock Purdy, he proved you pretty damn right.
Mm-hmm.
If there's one person this year that you had to put your money on day 3 or undrafted, who do you think that is? And that's not for fantasy football, but just performing as an NFL quarterback.
I'd say if Tyson Bagent out of Shepherd gets drafted, that's definitely one, because I think he's a bit of a wild card, but has such high upside and a decently high floor. It's just the level of competition narrative that surrounds him is obviously really bad. And then as far as a guy that could go day 2 or day 3 that I think has now cemented himself as a quarterback who will go on day 2 is Jake Haener out of Fresno State. And then as far as someone who could land on either day 2 or day 3, Tanner McKee out of Stanford has also been very impressive to me. So I'd say between those 3, and I mean, these are quarterbacks I've worked with for a decent amount of time that I'm comfortable betting on any of them, to be honest with you.
Shepherd College. Okay.
Shepherd.
I had to do it. I'm like, where the fuck is
Where's
Shepherd?
that?
What?
Hey,
Very small school. Sounds like a high school, but it's college.
Yeah.
That
awesome.
sounds like a Bill Belichick deep dive when he's
Shut
finding people from these like places that I've never
Look,
heard of.
He might. He took Bailey Zappi. I mean,
Dog.
me and Bailey
I don't want to
Zappi
hear.
were like out on an island before everyone figured out who he was.
I don't want to hear any bad words. That man, SEC king, Bailey Zappi,
Yes.
Patriots fan here. I was mad we took Cole Strange in the first round. You know, could have been a second round pick. The Rams are looking at him as a 4th round pick. He's okay. You know.
Well, that would be the Rams' first pick of the draft, though. So they were looking at him as a high priority.
Yeah, high priority at 115. Okay. Top 5 guys. Crissy, I'm going to go how your top 5 is broken down, but we are just going to add Anthony Richardson in place of Tanner McKee because that's what we have currently. So I will start with Bryce Young. Do you believe he goes to Carolina since you have him as your number 1?
I think that's a toss-up. I mean, I think they're obviously going to go CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. I think I expect them to go Bryce Young, though, at the end of the day.
Okay. Ryan, Josh, I know you both put in here the Texans because you both think Stroud goes to the Panthers, so it's basically 1-2. Crissy, do you think then the Texans will take CJ Stroud, or whoever the 2 stragglers is not there at 1, the Texans will go to them at 2?
Oh, yeah, I think there's no question that the Texans either select CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. There's no question it's going to be one of those 2, no matter who's still remaining. So I would say Stroud to the Texans at that point at number 2.
Before I go to Ryan and Josh, do you think, which of the quarterbacks do you think fits better in Carolina's Frank Reich system, Bryce Young or CJ Stroud?
I'd say system-wise that CJ Stroud probably fits better. It's just that I think that Bryce Young, just being the prospect that he is and the safe bet that he is going to appeal to a team in the first pick more.
I think you had a very interesting point earlier where Bryce Young might be the more ready-made, and Carolina, we've talked about this for a while. The NFC South is a division up there for grabs. So why in the world wouldn't you take a more ready-made quarterback when you could win it in year 1?
I mean, realistically,
I have one question before we tackle some other stuff here. I'm a huge Bryce Young fan. I absolutely adore him. I think he's fantastic. My roommate's an Alabama fan. I watch a ton of Alabama games. How much do you think his height or lack thereof is going to come into play and potentially scare teams from taking him? And by teams, I say potentially in this case, Carolina, making him the first overall pick.
I would say that if he was a little bit more of an unsolidified prospect, maybe a little bit. But I mean, I know if Will Levis was a bigger deal, and if Will Levis was the 1-2 and it was Bryce Young and Will Levis, then maybe you would say that. But I think that like Bryce Young, that he's shown what he can do. And then also, I mean, you think about the Russell Wilsons, the guys like that who have had success, that their height hasn't affected them. I think if this was a quarterback who wanted to run all the time and he had some question marks as a passer, then yeah, I'm getting concerned. Because if I have a quarterback who is running all the time, he's not throwing the football very often, he's not very good at throwing the football, he better be 6'5" and 250.
So a shorter guy. Now Kyler Murray runs pretty damn well, but fairly even in terms of height comparison and weight. I think Kyler's lighter, but I mean, that didn't deter Arizona from taking him 1. I forget his exact draft class, but obviously there was.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't remember there really being any other, like, even semi-decent quarterbacks in that draft class.
There wasn't a Stroud breathing down his neck or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to go down to, you know what? I will skip over my CJ Stroud a little bit. It's not a CJ Stroud hate. It's just Ohio State hate. I don't like Ohio State quarterbacks. That's a common thing. Sporting News put out a great thing. The record in what they have done for quarterbacks in their history has not been good. So to me, they don't attract good quarterbacks. That's all. And yes, Joe Burrow did go to Ohio State. No, he didn't. He played at LSU, and that's where he shined.
Oh yeah.
No, I definitely agree.
That was not the argument anyone would have made.
Oh no.
I think it's funny when Alabama likes to claim Jalen Hurts now.
They don't.
And because of Oklahoma. Oh, I've seen.
Well, see, I see the Alabama pictures. Yeah, I see the Alabama pictures all the time. The Ohio State thing, I will say, being from Ohio, I do see it in like some of the like comment sections, and I'm like, stop.
He's not.
This is not healthy.
At least the Jalen Hurts one has a little bit of merit because he actually
played there.
Played for the team.
Well there. Yeah,
but in Crissy, I don't know. You brought up that like Hendon Hooker has a higher up passing upside of Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts as a passer at Alabama, I don't think was anything great. And then he goes to Oklahoma and gets a heck of a lot better.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I feel like you have to give Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma a lot of the credit for making Jalen Hurts draftable to the point where he's at now. I don't think Alabama can claim Jalen Hurts, honestly.
No, I'd agree.
All right, good. From the SEC queen herself, I'll take it. All right. Will Levis, the next guy on your list. Where do you think Will Levis ends up? Is he a high first-round pick, mid? What team do you think he goes to?
I think that he's a second-round pick at this point, to be honest with you. Okay. There's a point in time that I might have said the New Orleans Saints, but I'm thinking that they'll be moving in a bit of a different direction at this point. So I would say any of the teams that were expected to take a quarterback in the first round that might have held out, I would expect them to go Will Levis in the second round.
Okay. Josh, you have the Colts. Ryan, you have the Lions. So, Crissy, of those two, who would be more likely to take Levis? That because you're now dropping into the second round at this point. Do you think Detroit or Indy would pull the trigger or think to pull the trigger on Levis that early? Again, probably.
I would think Detroit, and I mean Detroit was a team that was pinned to. Malik Willis a good bit last year, so that shows you, and there was evidence of interest there that shows you that this is a team that is open to a quarterback of that nature. That was thinking of pulling the trigger on it last year. So I would reasonably project that.
Go ahead, Josh.
I got to ask about Levis because I feel like there's so many scouts and GMs that just fall in love with, his prototypical size, the big arm. Like, what stands out to you that makes you say that, he's not a first rounder in your eyes?
It's inconsistency in the lower body mechanics. It's inconsistency in the footwork. A quarterback is never a quarterback unless they're accurate, and that's where it starts. And if I can't trust a quarterback in that, from that aspect, you don't know what you're getting. And that was my biggest. Everyone got so mad at me because I didn't like Malik Willis. And I hope that they all enjoyed that game where he threw for 80 yards because he's still not still not polished in those aspects. I was right. And so Will Levis has shown mechanical improvement. I talked to Will Levis earlier this offseason about what he was doing to mechanically improve, and I think he's made some strides, but is he where he needs to be at? No, he's not. So I think that if he can continue to make that jump, and if it continues and gets better into the NFL, then you have a guy, like I've said before, is instantly a top 10 NFL quarterback because he has literally everything that can be desired. But I think the only thing about Will Levis is we are in this era where everyone loves strong arms, 6'5", 250 pounds, and typically can do some power run stuff. That's what people like. But at the end of the day, that's not a quarterback. And so I think a lot of people are realizing that. I think the trend that we're moving into that we should be looking at more is a quarterback who is first and foremost a successful pocket passer. Now, I think the era of the statue pocket passer is dead. The drop back because the game's speeding up. The hash marks are different in the NFL. Some of these teams' offensive line's not where it needs to be. And so I think that with the way the game's moving, people want to say you have to have a quarterback who can run. Well, no, if you have to have a quarterback who can run, it means that the rest of your offense has gone to hell and you have some serious needs to address. But I think you need a quarterback who can evade pressure, a quarterback who can do things occasionally off platform, can do play action things for you. That's what you want. But you don't want to try to reinvent Taysom Hill because that's a once in a blue moon thing. And I think we're finally having teams realize, hey, that doesn't happen very often. We can't say this prospect's going to be this because he's probably not going to.
You mentioned his
having a cannon for an arm is not it. I like it.
Yeah.
You mentioned Levis's consistency issues. As someone who does not watch a lot of college football, so I start with stats before I go to film. One of the things that jumped out to me is 23 interceptions over the last 2 seasons, which is more than like every other player had in their entire college career. You could probably even combine 2 and 3 of these guys and they don't hit 23 interceptions. Is that a product of trusting his arm too much? Is that a product of the inconsistency? Like, what is your take on that large amount of interceptions over 2 seasons?
It's a combination of decision making, overthrows, and then the fact that Will Levis is a relatively experienced player, but he is not an experienced quarterback. Will Levis played the lion role at Penn State alongside Tommy Stevens, and that role is not quarterback. It's a do-it-all. It is Taysom Hill. And so he came over and he played 2 seasons as a quarterback at Kentucky and experienced a lot of change and shifts and coordinators, et cetera, during that time period. Was a little bit discombobulated. So, I mean, Will Levis as a pure quarterback overall at the highest stage, not very established, really.
I love what you said of you don't need a quarterback that runs. I just the run for being a running quarterback, being a mobile quarterback are 2 very different things. Like Patrick Mahomes is a mobile quarterback. Lamar Jackson is a running quarterback in my opinion. And
Yes.
I love these. There's 2 very distinct and different things. They need to be able to throw in the pocket first because that's what a quarterback's supposed to do. And then you can sprinkle in all the other fun stuff too, like Mahomes throwing off his back foot behind his back, between his legs, doing a backflip. Doesn't matter. He's going to complete the pass somehow. But doing any of that, even you could even maybe put out there Justin Herbert may be the young most, or even Joe Burrow may be the young most prototypical pocket passer, I guess, if you're looking at it historically.
Yeah, but Joe Burrow is not a drop back statue like Zach Mettenberger was. That's the difference there.
Exactly. And because when he needs to, he can run and get 3 yards or run and get out of the pocket and move a little bit. There's no Drew Brees. There's no Tom Brady. They're gone. You need at the minimum, like Derek Carr. Like that's your minimum of what you need for mobility. And then your best spot is that Burrow, Herbert, Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, a little more on the run side, but obviously progressing as a passer. So love that you said that. Okay. Hendon Hooker, your guy that you believe could be the best quarterback looking back at this class 5-10 years down the road. Where do you think Hendon Hooker lands? Because you believe he could be the best guy, but what do you think from an NFL standpoint? What do they think? Where do you think he ends up?
I want to see Hendon Hooker with the Saints, and I do think that it could happen. I think the Saints are a landing spot for potentially Hendon Hooker or Tanner McKee at this point. I think that Hendon Hooker fits a lot of different schemes. I think he's a quarterback that has a little bit of everything. So I think he's very versatile in terms of what he could fit into, what he can thrive in. And I think that with what New Orleans likes to do and where they are, I think that this could be a potentially good fit.
Okay. Josh and Ryan, you both had this. Ryan had the Seahawks. Josh, you had the Titans.
Yeah, Seattle. I was playing the local connection there with, being a Tennessee Volunteer. And plus, I feel like with the ACL, I feel like a team that's going to be looking at him, they're likely going to have a starter already in place. And that's what Tennessee has with Tannehill. Now, I don't know if they're going to start changing philosophy to where they're going to open up the offense a little bit, but I feel like every mock draft I'm reading, it's like they're trying to change philosophy and get more receivers in there. And I'm like, okay, cool. You got Treylon Burks. I've seen Jalen Hyatt mock there. I've seen, Quentin Johnson landing there. I've seen Jordan Addison landing there in the first round in a lot of mock drafts. And I'm like, okay, well, if Hooker ends up falling out and maybe he's there in the second round, that could potentially be a fit if they do end up going, more offense related in this draft.
Yeah, I think so. I think that Tennessee is a landing place for a lot of different quarterbacks. Like you say, a team in a state of transition. I think that that's going to be one of the teams to watch in terms of what they do. I mean, I think that as far as kind of what Tennessee's after, the Malik Willis experiment is in play, but I think there's a lot of doubt. I think Malik Willis has done a lot to put in that doubt, honestly. But I think at the same time, this is Malik Willis's first year. So as much as I was high on this prospect, I think he needs more time. But I certainly don't think that it's too early to go back to the drawing board either in terms of just bringing somebody else on.
Yeah, and they don't have a lot of draft capital invested in him anyway. I mean, he was a third-round
No.
pick, and a lot of quarterbacks that aren't taken in the first round, they get jettisoned very quickly if they don't show that type of improvement so early.
Yeah,
I'm just
but like I said before, I mean, Malik Willis projects me as a quarterback with an incredibly high ceiling and a horribly low floor to the point that he's almost unusable as a quarterback. So I think it's just a matter of how he develops. I showed a lot of development in the offseason showcases ahead of the last draft as a passer, but it's still been up and down, and I think he's still subpar in so many categories, making that jump over the NFL.
So just looking at New Orleans draft picks, just because that's where you have them slated. New Orleans drafts at 29 currently. They traded with San Francisco, and then they have 40. So the 8th, 9th pick in the second round. Do you think they swing for him in the first to get that 50-year option, or save it, roll the dice, take him, try and take him 11, 12 picks later?
Yeah, I think that I honestly think Hendon Hooker will be off the board by that point. I could just feel that happening with the amount of teams that need quarterbacks and the fact that this is a quarterback that probably deserves to be top 10, but is going to fall a little bit just because of his injury. But I think if the Saints are to go later, then it would be my last quarterback that I mentioned that they could potentially get Tanner McKee later on. And then as far as Anthony Richardson, I know that's the name we mentioned earlier. That's a quarterback I could see in Las Vegas, Seattle, or Minnesota.
Okay.
I had Seattle for Hooker just because they have 20 and 38. So they're going to really be able to feel out the draft and figure out kind of, do we need to take him now or can we wait until day 2 sort of thing?
Yeah. And I think one of the things too, though, is that we know that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are 1 and 2, but I think it's we thought Will Levis was cemented as a quarterback who is going to be within the top 10. And then before Hendon Hooker's injury, he was certain to be in the top 10, but now we know 1, 2, and we have no idea what the hell is going to happen after that. And it's anyone's guess, and the guesses are all over the place.
Yeah. It reminds
100%.
me so much of last year where there was a good feeling that Kenny Pickett was going to be the first guy. And obviously Pickett not nearly on the level of these guys. And he probably made the right decision coming out last year because it would be disastrous for him this year. But with Kenny Pickett, and then you just kind of, like I said, you had all this guesswork around Malik Willis and even Desmond Ridder. And then everybody, with the exception of you, had egg on their face because these guys just kept falling and falling and falling. And again, it just goes back to my point of listen to the people who know football when it comes to the draft, not who are projecting these wonderful fantasy scenarios, because it just doesn't work out very well.
Yeah. We can project the wonderful fantasy scenarios when they're drafted. When they're drafted, because then we know, well, if they're a 5th round pick, they're probably not going to get a lot of playing time, things like that. The mock that I'm looking at, Hendon Hooker lasts till 48 going to Detroit, which could be an interesting spot there for him. But we'll end on the last one.
Actually, I had one more question.
No.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You seem pretty adamant because you've brought up the Saints multiple times. And Josh, I noticed you didn't even have them listed as a team that may be interested in quarterback. And I was kind of thinking the same way. Derek Carr is far from old. So do you think the Saints are just insurance policy right away? Because they also brought Jameis Winston back in. So I guess just what is your pulse on why you think the Saints are going to be looking at quarterback in this draft?
Yeah, I think there's potential could be later on as opposed to earlier, as we originally thought this was a team before the Derek Carr thing happened.
Yeah.
But Derek Carr is getting older. Derek Carr has been inconsistent. And Jameis Winston, to me, has not been it. I've never been high on Jameis Winston. He's continued to show why no one should be. So I think that will they do it? I don't know. But I think mid-round to the earlier late rounds, if that makes sense, is a sweet spot for the Saints to go get somebody, especially with a draft that is this deep at quarterback.
I was going to say, I think Derek Carr, the way that his contract is structured, like he's getting a bunch of money early, but it's like they could very easily get out of that deal.
I got it for you right here, because that's what I was wondering. His dead cap hit this year is $60 million. His cap hit's 7.2. Not happening. Next year, 35.7 in cap hit, 52.8 in dead cap. 2025 is when you can get out. 45.7 on a cap hit, 17.1 in dead cap.
Which would be an excellent.
So you're looking at a Jordan Love situation.
Yeah. So you're looking at, essentially, you'd be looking at a 2-season project. Hendon Hooker would start in his 3rd NFL year. Seems reasonable. He could also start in his first NFL year when Derek Carr is Derek Carr. So this is a very real possibility.
Yeah.
All right, last one to close out here. Anthony Richardson. I've already said how you feel about Anthony Richardson, not in your top 5. You don't like him as a passer. Do you think because of the hype he is a first-round pick? And if so,
I think
where does
so.
he
I
go?
think someone's
Okay.
gonna. I don't think he deserves to go in the first round. I think someone will, and I believe it's going to be Seattle number 20.
Hey, I got that one right.
A team that's been working through a lot of growing pains at the quarterback position over recent years, and I think that he's kind of the perfect little experiment for them. But I also think, like I said, it's just it's still, in my opinion, need to sit for a year, and it's still very raw and undeveloped in just about every single aspect.
Okay.
Seattle would be a good spot for that. And the way they structure Gino's contract, all his guaranteed money is this year.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. The mock I'm looking at, I just want to get your thoughts on this. Anthony Richardson goes 4 to the Indianapolis Colts. How do you feel on that in general?
Anthony
Crissy.
Richardson going 4 to you said 4 to the Indianapolis
4
Colts?
to the Indianapolis Colts. Is
That's
what I'm
way.
looking at.
I think that's way too early, and I think that I don't know. I just think if he's going to go the first round, that I see him more in the later of the first round. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think that would be a very dumb decision on their part.
Yeah,
Love
teams
it.
get drunk when they're chasing quarterbacks. So
They do, though. That's something that's very true. I mean, I expected Malik Willis to go in the first round early last year just because of the exact statement you just made.
Yeah.
Well,
All
and
right.
that's such an interesting, because like it seems like the Anthony Richardson Malik Willis comparison is making itself, and that's what I was, because like we all thought Willis could go in the first round last year, and it just didn't happen, and it didn't happen for a long time, and I don't see Richardson falling that far. I had him going to the Colts simply because, Josh, you've kind of already made the connection. Shane Steichen is used to having mobile quarterbacks, so he needs to develop as a passer. And I just felt like the connection made itself. Obviously, Jalen Hurts and he, very different quarterbacks. But I feel like if you're hungry for quarterback, why not take the guy who just blew up the world?
I mean, he also had Phillip Rivers in San Diego or
That's
Los
fair.
Angeles, I guess.
So
I mean,
they're literally polar opposites.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Same
Like,
person.
and that's what I like about Steichen as an
Same
offensive
person.
coordinator. It's, you know, he's one of these coaches that isn't trying to drop a square peg into a round hole, and that round hole being his system. He's building his system around the playmakers that he has. So, yeah, I think it's easy to say, you know what? Yeah, let's put a Hendon Hooker or an Anthony Richardson in this offense. But at the end of the day, Chris Ballard's the one that's making these plays.
Yeah.
What type of quarterback does Chris Ballard tend to go after? It's these statuesque, bigger, taller type quarterbacks.
Oh,
That's
I
why
like
I think that Levis
old white
ends
guys
up
who
there.
can't play football anymore.
Well, that
the
too.
Players he tends to go.
Yeah, but I mean, they also traded for Carson Wentz, and again, taller, more statuesque. Yes, he has some mobility. Again, that's why I think that Will Levis might fit that Chris Ballard ideology a little bit better than what people want to peg for Steichen's offense.
Okay. I got 2 things to close it out. Here's one on quarterbacks. 2024 draft, Crissy.
Mm-hmm.
Quarterback that could challenge Caleb Williams, Drake Maye at the top of the 2024 draft. Is there anyone you have your eye on that could potentially challenge a couple of those guys?
Michael Pratt out of Tulane. I think
yeah.
and I know there's a lot of people that might say that sounds crazy, but whenever I made Michael Pratt the number 10 quarterback in the nation on Sports Illustrated last year, everyone else had him between number 50 and number 100 in the FBS. And now everyone has him in the top 10. So it's funny how that works out. I also said he's the most underrated quarterback in the nation. He proved that and led his team to the most historic comeback in college football history.
Yeah, they went, 2-10 and then 10-2 last year?
Yes, and I actually talked to him today. This is going to be a more pass-heavy offense moving forward. I think he kind of, I wouldn't say suffered from it, because I think he was still able to show what he was able to do through the air, but I think it's going to come to light so much more, because I call it the Bryce Hall effect. So Brock Purdy and I had a conversation on the phone before he went to the draft, and he said, I'm not trying to throw Bryce under the bus. Like, there's no way to say this and it sound pretty, but he basically said, and I agreed on this with him, is that Bryce Hall was such a talent that you had to tailor the offense to him. And so Brock was getting knocked or not getting enough credit for what he was able to do through the air and on the deep ball. But really, it was just because Bryce is so good, we can lean into Bryce. And so why not do that? And it was no fault of Brock, and Brock wasn't doing anything wrong. He's just that he never got the credit that he was supposed to because of the way this offense is tailored. Tajay Spears was Tulane's Breece Hall last year. So I think we're going to see a lot more of Michael continuing to get better through the air, which is something that he was already great at last year. He's working a lot on footwork type stuff. He said this offseason. I think that that's something that's been improving. And then this is a true dual threat quarterback. But he's getting better at not running recklessly, but has done a lot as far as evading pressure and using his legs, and which runs very tough, very gritty, and has made a big impact on the ground. And really the same amount of impact on the pass, if not more, but just something that we're finally getting to see that he's always had.
Love that.
All right. I'm gonna because the defensive side of me wants to ask a question. And don't worry, this is not a curveball. All right. This is not a curveball.
That you
Crissy,
promised before the show you would not do.
Listen,
Yeah.
I promise, because you want to know why? Because Crissy wrote an article on him back on February 28th. Okay. This is why I can ask this question. All right. So I believe he's one of probably the biggest, if not one of the only guys Mississippi State is anticipating to be drafted, Emmanuel Forbes, the cornerback.
Yes.
Now, Ryan and I are big IDP defensive player guys, individual defensive player guys. You have him slated either Vikings, Bucks, Cowboys. Now, this was pre-Stephon Gilmore trade, so that very well could change at that point. Obviously, Dallas doesn't need a second DB at this point, but Gilmore's old. They could still use him. Of the three teams, where do you think he fits best? And what is he best at going into the NFL? What are teams going to really like about him? Because that could translate for fantasy football players.
Yeah, I'd say either of the two, because I don't see the Cowboys happening anymore, like you mentioned. I think either of those two we fit well in, just because I see Emmanuel Forbes as a solid addition to any team looking for a defensive back. His ball hawking ability, it's not just good, it's historically good. He set FBS records for interceptions this year. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, we're talking about most recent years in college football history, and what this player was able to accomplish not only in the conference, but literally across the entire country. And the only thing that he really gets knocked for is having a slight frame, which I do think does kind of hurt him a little bit. But he's got the wingspan, and we see these corners that are thinner that still have success. So I think that he can do the same. I do think he needs to put weight on, but that's something that'll be taken care of later on. But I think just a really aggressive player who uses his hands well and obviously has benefited from it a lot. So I think that if a team's looking to get some takeaways for the air, that Emmanuel Forbes can take care of that in year one.
Nice. Worked in my defensive question.
I'd love to see him in Minnesota opposite Andrew.
Yeah.
Booth. Then they have, brought Harrison Smith back. They have
Minnesota needs like 20 corners. Any corner would fit in Minnesota.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We finally see
Yeah.
Cam Dantzler not there anymore. So I just feel like getting good corners
Cam
there.
Dantzler
My
some days.
goodness, how great would that
Another
be? for
Mississippi State guy.
Yeah.
Wait, Cam Dantzler went to Mississippi State?
Yes, he did.
Oh, did you like Cam Dantzler coming out?
I did. I did like Cam Dantzler coming out.
Okay. Yeah, he's had a rough NFL career so far. Could turn
Yeah,
around.
he has. No,
Could turn around. Still young, could turn it around. But yeah, Minnesota needs all the help they can get. And if they get him too, that's a young secondary too, because Sign will come back from his injury, who was that was one of 1,000 Georgia players drafted in the first round last year. So it's that secondary could shape up pretty well, especially if Manuel goes there. All right, gentlemen, anything else? Any other questions to ask on this quarterback class?
No,
Chrissy's answered everything.
A lot. Yeah,
questions,
Chrissy's been fucking awesome. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Crissy. This has been
Thank
great.
you.
Yes, you've been great.
I don't
It's
say
been a
this lightly.
masterclass in quarterback.
I was
play.
just going to say, I don't say this lightly. We've been doing this show with me involved for 3 years now. I've never had the pleasure of talking to anyone who knows this game like you do. Fucking
Thank
amazing.
you.
And thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
this time
Seriously.
with us. So.
100%. You
Absolutely.
broke it down immensely. Like you didn't just throw out Hendon Hooker, I think could be the best. You were like, here's 17 reasons why
Yeah.
he could be the best. Like you back up what people would call asinine, crazy shit coming out of someone's mouth. And you back it up like with legit facts. That's like, oh, okay. Well, I can still disagree with you, but like you have your cold hard facts and why, and it
Amazing.
was awesome. So, big thank you. Again, hey, nailed the guest. I'm just saying, I was like, hey, Josh, we should try and get Crissy on because I'm sure she'd be great. I also think now Twitter sucks because I don't see people's tweets that I want to see in my feed anymore. And it really makes me mad. But I think I saw you like going in on some people and just being like real, like, here's the facts and here's what it was. And I was like, hell yeah, I absolutely love that.
I do that on a regular basis, so we don't know what day it was.
I love it.
Perfect.
It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you for joining us. This was awesome. You can follow her at Crissy_Froyd. Where else can they find you? You write for Sports Illustrated. Anywhere else they can find your work?
Yeah, on Saturday Down South and Betting Pros as well. A lot of content coming out over there.
Heck yeah. Awesome. And you do more than just football, right? I see a lot of like baseball articles too, because Mississippi
Yeah,
State's
we do
pretty
a
damn
little
good.
bit of SEC baseball and basketball seasonally. I've got some great interns that's kind of their beat while I stay on football. But yeah, we do coverage on that as well, obviously.
Nice, sweet, awesome.
Love it.
Okay, next week, new position, folks. Where do we always go? The running back position, right behind the quarterback. Stars of tomorrow. Is it Jagger Maye? Beautiful. That's two awesome
Dope
names
name.
back to back.
Yeah.
Awesome names back to back. Crissy Froyd, Jagger Maye from DLF to join us. New face in the space, some fresh perspective. Again, way smarter than the three of us. So, and very much on show today. No more than today. Don't forget as well, Mock It Like It's Hot, 11 a.m. Eastern Monday. Kevin Coleman from the Debbie Royale, great guy, joins the Dynasty Rookie Mock. Very sad that Desmond Ridder didn't go earlier in the Superflex draft that you guys were doing. But I've also now when Crissy says I'm not the biggest fan of Desmond Ridder, that scares me. So whatever. I'm just gonna suck in Dynasty at that position, and I've come to accept it.
Yeah.
And
I gotta ask really quick before you sign off, Crissy, do you play fantasy football?
I don't anymore because my reality football takes too much of my time.
Nah, that's fair.
Very fair.
Fair enough.
Very fair.
Fair enough.
But you know what I learned today is that I'm drafting Hendon Hooker in the second
There you
round.
go. just keep it going.
I'm drafting Hendon Hooker, and that's not even a question in the
There you
the
go.
Club Fantasy Dynasty League. Okay. Awesome. Crissy, thank you once again for
Thank you, so
Josh
much, Crissy.
at the One Hudsonian, Crissy at Crissy_Froyd, Ryan at the Fantasy 5, myself at Joe_Zola. You can follow Club Fantasy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Club Fantasy FFL. The URL is clubfantasyffl.com. Always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football. We will see you